YouTube parts. Jack Spade here, again with High Noon Leatherworks. Back with the series on making a knife sheath for the Schrade Uncle Henry fixed blade knife. On the last episode, we made the pattern to use to cut out our leather, and this episode we're going to choose a piece of leather and start cutting. So come on in and we'll get started. Alright, I've got a couple of different pieces of leather here, and these are just scrap pieces that I kept back for something like this. But got a piece here that's must be toward the end of a side that I bought. It feels like it's a little flimsier, a little thinner than this piece. Again, this is the end of a side. It's a little darker in shade here than it is up here, but that's another option. Then I've got, and it is thicker, but then I've got this. This is an older piece of leather that I've had for quite a while, but it's really thick, and I mean, it is a good piece of leather. Again, it's a little dark. It may not, and I am going to tool this, so I'm not sure how this is going to react to tooling compared to a little softer piece. But let's see how much of this we have and see how this may fit into this project. We can get a full piece, or the back piece there. Get it there. So there's several places here that we could get a full piece out. This does have some, looks like some little bit of scarring down here. Let's look at this piece here and see what we've got. I can get a full piece there. I can use this lighter end down here and keep the darker part of it, the darkness down here on the end that folds over. That would work. It does have a little bit of scarring on it, but I think I can cut that out of there. You're not going to see it. So I think this piece is going to be the best choice. And I think what that'll do is that'll also allow me to get the front piece and then that third thickness that I need to go between the front and the back for the spacing. I think it'll allow me to get all that out of this one piece. So that may work out great. So let me go ahead and trace my pattern. Again, I use poster board for my pattern material most of the time. Sometimes if I don't have any, I'll use something else, but that's what I use most of the time. It's easy to work with, it's cheap, and it's sturdy enough that when I'm tracing onto my leather, it doesn't want to fold up or slide or move, bend. So I'll trace all the way around that will become my back piece. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out because I don't want to start cutting up my pattern for my other pieces until I make sure this one turns out okay and there's not a problem, because then I have to go back and tape all that back together. So do the same thing as when I cut out my pattern. I'll start at the strap end, and this is a fairly thick piece of leather, so you may have to take your razor knife and go over it more than once in order to get through. And you can feel sometimes when you're cutting leather, you can feel where it may be just a little softer in one place than it is another. You can feel your knife change. You can feel the blade. And the drag. And sometimes you can feel where it's not going all the way through the leather, and then all of a sudden you feel it, you can feel it where it goes through. So, and some of that may be how hard you're pressing down, but you'll find that you'll catch yourself really bearing down on it with some pressure, and next thing you know, you're like, man, my arm hurts, because you don't realize how hard you're bearing down on that blade as you're cutting. And it does get pretty tedious around a sharp corner. So just take your time. It's not a race. The key is to make sure you make good cuts and you don't get outside of your line. You want to stay on that line. If you have to, stop, take a rest, take a breather, and then go back at it. Again, you want to take your time, be very careful, because you don't get a second chance at cutting a piece of leather, because if you make a mistake, that piece of leather is done for. You might be able to use it for something else, or you might not, but you're going to have to start over with that project with another piece of leather, because if you make a mistake, you just start over and grin and bear it, move on. And again, like I said, you may have to go over it more than once, maybe just on the corners. That's where you got to be real careful anyway, is on those radiuses. And once you cut through, it's a little easier to follow next time because you already kind of have a groove in there to follow to get through the rest of the leather. One little spot left there. All right. So there's my back piece, and then this is the piece that folds over for your belt loop, and we'll stitch back here. So the knife will fit in there like so. So the next step set that one aside. The next step is I can go back to my pattern and I want to cut on the handguard line because that piece right there is going to be the top. So I can cut straight across that handguard line, and this is, again, you can always tape this back together with some clear tape. I've done it several times. I'll cut that off. That will become my top part, and you'll see here in just a second when I cut this out what I mean by my top part. And I'll lay that on. I'm going to try to keep it, since it's going to be the one that's out and I'm going to tool it, I want to keep a nice piece of leather for that, so I'll try to keep it away from any scarring or discoloration. And then go ahead and trace my pattern onto my leather. For tracing and cutting, it does help to be ambidextrous. So there's my top part. I'll go ahead and cut it out. Again, I think I'm going to start with the top edge. Nice straight line. That's where the handguard's going to sit, so I want to make sure it's good and straight. I think I'll go ahead and cut that piece off so I don't have to handle that part of the leather as I'm trying to cut. And then down here all I have is this, so I'll cut that off. And I'll put that in my scrap pile, be able to use that for some smaller things, keychains, coasters, something like that. Again, I think the key to cutting good straight lines is this self-healing pad. I think those things are invaluable. And they do eventually get bad. They're reversible, at least this one is. So you can flip it over several times. And they're not very expensive. You can get them at Hobby Lobby, Walmart, any place like that that sells crafts. This is the only one I've ever had. I haven't had to replace it yet, but it is getting some wear on it. Again, when you get down to these radiuses, that's when you may want to turn your piece. That'll help you really get around those corners. Now, this small piece, scrap piece, I'll just probably discard that, because there's not much I can do with that. Let's take a look and see how close we are here. Looks like I can trim just a little bit off of that radius right there. Yeah, so there's my top piece. So I got my top and my bottom, my back, and the knife will go into the handguard. So it'll sit in that deep. So if you wanted to get an idea how much space you had, that kind of gives you an idea. So I've got my top, I've got my bottom or my back. Now I need to go back to my pattern, and I need to cut the spacer out. Again, I'm going to use my straight edge or my razor knife. Now this one, since it's so thin, you're going to have to be real cautious when you go to trace it out. And the reason you want to be so cautious is it's so thin it can become real flimsy, and you don't want it spreading on you or compressing, or then it'll be the wrong size. You won't be able to get it to stitch correctly. It could run interference with the blade, and then it could be a nightmare. So it could end up being a problem. So what you could do is go ahead and cut that out, and that's what you end up with. That'll be a piece of leather that will go between the front and the back of the sheath and be stitched in there. I'll glue it first before I stitch it, so it doesn't move while I'm stitching or punching. but you can lay this on your leather when you're drawing your pattern to the leather. If you need to, you can lay this down in there, maybe even this way, to make sure that it's not moving on you. And that'll give you a good guide. Now, again, that piece is just going to be a spacer for this, so that when that blade's going in and out of that sheath, it's actually, the blade itself is going to be rubbing on this piece of leather. It can't get to the stitches. So that's the key to this piece. You can do a knife sheath without that spacer piece, but if you do, again, it's not going to take very many times of withdrawing that knife and placing that knife back in that sheath. It's going to get into these stitches over here, and eventually your stitches are going to come, they're going to be cut, they're going to come apart, and then you're going to have a mess. So you're better off putting that spacer in between there before you even complete the project. So I think what I'll do is, if you remember the first piece of scrap that I had, I said it was a little thinner, must have been like toward the outside part of the side, the cow side that I had. So I think I'll take that, because it's plenty thick compared to the blade. And again, you want it to make sure that for it to slide in and out of there good, that it's at least as thick as the back side of the blade. So you might look at that too. So, and it is. So I think I'll take that piece, and looks like I have a pretty good straight edge here to start with. So I'll use that to my advantage. And it looks like this is in pretty good shape. It's not moving, spreading, or compressing on me at this point. So what I'll do is I'll lay that on that straight edge and then hold down on this side, and I'll make me a little mark so I know where that is going to go when I get to this side. Then I'll hold down on the straight edge side, and it makes it a little more difficult because you're talking about a thinner piece of poster board of your pattern. So it may, if you can't hold on to it real good, or your fingers are in the way, what I do is I go in between. I mark in between my fingers and my thumb, and then just start around the nose of it. Then I move my fingers or slide my fingers out of the way so that I can connect those lines. Then I'll come down, keeping this side where I marked it, and I'll do the same thing. So I'll come down around this side, slide my thumb on around, come around the tip, connect those lines, then I'll switch hands, and I'll do the other side. And then slide your fingers and your thumb out of the way, connect those lines. Come down to the bottom. Hold that steady. And finish connecting those. So you'll see what you'll end up with is an outline of that piece of the pattern. I'll set these pieces. I end up with 3 pieces. When I'm done, I could always glue those back, or glue them back. I could always tape those back together with some clear tape and use those again if I needed that. Chances are I'm not going to make an exact knife sheath of this particular knife again. Probably be a different knife if I did make another sheath. So now I can go ahead, take my razor knife, and start cutting that out. Those pieces could be used again, so I'll hang on to those, put those in my scrap bin. And you remember me saying that this piece was not quite as thick as the other 2 pieces that I had to choose from. And what that'll do is that'll make cutting this out much easier than cutting it from a thicker, stiffer piece. So I should be able to get through this with one pass. And I have not sharpened or changed my blade, my razor knife blade. I'm still using the same one as I started from. So there's my first cut. I'll cut off this small pointed piece, throw that in my trash pile, save this larger piece, put that in my scrap pile. And now I'll come back and I'll cut around the inside. Again, the key to this is a sharp knife, a steady hand, and moving slow. I guarantee you, at least what I have found, the faster you try to move, the more mistakes you're going to make. So patience is very, very key when cutting out leather from a pattern. You have to be very patient. Faster you go, at least what I've found, faster you go, the more mistakes you're going to make. And then once you make one of those mistakes, guess what? Then you have to turn around and you got to redo it. So now you have twice as much time invested. And people are like, well, I'm trying to hurry up and get this done. Well, guess what? Now you're spending more time because you have to redo it. So there's the piece out of the center. I can definitely use that for something. I'll throw that in my scrap bin. And then there's what you end up with. So that's your spacer. So it goes, and I'll glue this in here like so. See how that fits around the outside edge, and you can see how the knife fits right inside of it. and it still has a little bit of room. Remember, if you go back to the last episode when we were doing the pattern, I left about 1/8 of an inch around it, so it's not gonna, you don't have to shove it in there real hard. It should slide in and out of there pretty nice. And then the top part lays on top. So that'll all end up being glued, stitched together. So that'll all end up being glued and then stitched together. And that knife should slide in and out of there very nice. So there's our leather cut out for a nice sheath. And again, I am going to do some tooling on this. So you want to come back for the next episode and stay tuned for that. It is going to be a custom design, so it should be very interesting. I haven't done this exact type of tooling before, so it will be something new for me. So you want to make sure you come back and you see that. We have done some burnishing, beveling. We've done that several times on the channel. So I'll probably do that off camera before the next episode. And then the next episode we'll come back and we'll do some grooving, and I'll start doing the tooling. So the next episode will be mostly the tooling, and it should be pretty interesting. So stay tuned, come back for that. So thanks for coming on back to the channel and sticking with me while I cut out this leather for this knife sheath. And next time, as I said, we will be doing some hand tooling, and it will be something very unique. So make sure you come back, check out the next episode, and as I always say, please like, share, and subscribe.